So we're talking about the cost of the true cost of roasting, of electric roasting, replacing fossil fuel operated roasters with electric roasters. When we talked about the program for this session and for the summit, I mean, we really debated several issues, I mean, and several subjects that we wanted to talk about. I mean, electric roasting is only one of that. Mm-hmm. But when I'm looking at, I was more motivated by the statements that are made or were made in magazines about electric roasting and this never-ending buzzword of sustainability. I mean, when I cannot just read it anymore, sometimes I forget about that. But that doesn't mean we're ignorant. So we looked at electric roasting and the true cost, and what you see today here is the utility cost for a roaster, the cost that it takes to operate a roaster electrically or with gas, or any other method for that matter. But also, for example, the CO2, the greenhouse gas. I'm glad I have support here within the audience. I mean, some of our competitors to a certain extent, but also I'm saying roaster manufacturers are here too, and they can prove me right or wrong, and I appreciate that. So when we looked at the various statements that are basically being traded in public, then we're seeing words like, or statements that were made, selecting a roasting machine based upon energy efficiency or CO2 emission is currently close to impossible. Right or wrong? I'm saying right now, wrong. We're providing you an answer for this. The second, only in some cases, the energy consumption figure indicated in the technical documentation of a machine. In some cases, I would say wrong. I have colleagues over there, they're roaster manufacturers, and they will probably confirm the same thing. They will provide utility consumption figures in their quotations. If you understand them as a consumer, different question, but you have always the opportunity to ask. Number three, in rare cases, the electric consumption of the motors and other components will be included. Emission values are even harder to come by. No. You can get them, those are available. I take the liberty of speaking for all roaster manufacturers. They know what they do, and they provide utility consumption figures. And if you ask them for greenhouse gases and emissions, they will provide answers for that. And last but not least, a lack of information about the conditions under which consumption and emission figures apply makes it impossible to estimate how much energy is actually needed. Well, who makes that decision? Who is really reviewing this other than a roaster manufacturer that provides you that product? Who has the qualification other than that? We do not expect the consumer to have that qualification to be able to rate that in any which way, but you get the answer from roaster manufacturers. So looking at that, and taking all of these statements that we want to have answers for, we will provide the true cost of operating an electric roaster, calculating utility consumption figures, CO2 emissions during the coffee roasting, key values influencing utility consumption figures, key values, key parameters that can change and are variables. And last but not least, debunking misinformation to make informed decisions. That's the goal for our presentation. Now, we're harvesting, and we've got to get a step back a little bit. We're harvesting about we're importing 27 million bags of coffee every year into North America. That includes Canada and the United States. And those are bags of 60 kilos, which is the commercial size of bag. If you multiply those 27 million with the 60 kilos, you get to 1,620,000,000 kilograms of coffee. That's what we're processing every year. America is a home market. Whatever we're bringing in, we're converting, we're consuming, and it stays here. Most of it. So if we're looking at that worldwide, then we're looking at 169 million bags, which would calculate to over 10 billion kilograms of coffee that we're processing. Why am I bringing this up? Because coffee will generate 4.82 kilogram per CO2 of CO2 per kilogram of green coffee. That is significant. We're not ignorant of that. And we're not basically talking here against electric roaster. We know what that means. So it is important to understand where's the coffee comes in every year. We're consuming, we're processing, and we're generating greenhouse gases. And how do we basically balance this? That will be the answer that we're trying to provide today. So coffee here, just on that chart here, you can see basically who's, generating more CO2 than just, coffee. But coffee is there with 4.82. Now that 4.82 kilogram of CO2 can vary. It depends a whole lot. This is what the entire value chain of coffee generates, from the farm all the way to the cup. Now that can change because of transportation. So for example, taking a coffee from Mexico or taking coffee from Costa Rica and bringing it to Europe, that's a different distance than, for example, taking it from Central America to a place here in the United States. So that value here, that can vary a little bit with transportation. But let me just show you how this is dividing. If we're going to this here, then you see here import and transport, which is green. You got roasting, processing, packaging. We can even break that further down. And then the brewing, some of it. All of this, as you can here see, per bag of coffee to the kilogram of coffee. And then here, that's the way you get to that 4.82 kilogram of CO2 per kilogram of coffee. This is the entire value chain. Now, that means from the farm level to the mill, to exportation, roasting, distribution, grinding, packaging, brewing, consumption, and disposal. This is basically the way this is broken down. Now, if we're looking at, we're processing all that 1,620,000,000 kilogram of coffee, that would generate, based on that number, about 7,808,000 metric tons of CO2. I'm saying it again. That's significant. And we are certainly, responsible for, in a way of, as responsible stewards, to see into options of how can we reduce basically this amount of CO2. But in all of that, 4% is the part of roasting in the entire value chain. Of that 4.82 kilogram, 4%, I'm saying again, 4%, which is about 0.2 kilogram of CO2. If we're roasting all of it means the 1,620,000,000 kilograms of coffee. Where is this going to go? So this is here the market. If you at the market breakdown, and we're looking at that, we're watching this. We have people, that analyzing this, every year. We have the top 10. Those are the national roasters, and they're roasting about, they have, I call it, not because of my military background, but I'm saying they have capacities of over 10,000 kilograms an hour. And if you then go to the regionals, they're going to be about 25 roasters between 2,000 and 9,000 kilogram of capacity, the roast capacity per hour. And then we have the mid-market segment, which is about over 100, between 500 and 2,000 kilogram. And then we talk about here the micros and the nanos in this area. Those are the small roasters. That includes roasters from like 500 gram of batch all the way to 35 kilogram of batch in that segment here. And obviously, in this segment here, it's the majority of all the roasters. This is, where we do business. This is where other roaster manufacturers doing business. We're catching here, so to say, the market entries to teach them about roasters. And if they do things right, they grow into that mid-market segment and eventually also further. So now, I'm particularly focusing on this here because when I'm opening a magazine and I'm reading those statements that we presented just, with the first slide, that's the stand where it's confusing, where it's coming from. Because this part here, where the majority of all roasters are, that is 10% of the 1,620,000,000 kilograms of coffee. 10% of that is processed by this bottom segment, the majority of all roasters, which is 162 million kilograms. And now, in order to qualify that or justify this, we took here, it's a model. It's a model. Assuming you have a 3 kilo roaster and you're roasting 3.5 batches an hour, or let's say you're roasting 4 batches an hour, 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. You cannot hear that? That's what I'm saying. You're roasting 4 batches an hour, 4 hours a day, 4 days a week, 52 weeks. That basically adds to 3,328 batches a year. Now multiply this with the size of your roaster. And then you get, and that's where we're trying to find the distribution. Who is roasting that 162 million kilos? And then we came up here with the reference of 1 kilo, 3 kilos, 5 kilo, 12, 35, 25, and 35. So the majority of all roasters installed, although not for capacity, is in this segment that is 3,100. Now, you could say, for example, well, I'm not roasting 4 batches in an hour, and I'm not roasting for 4 hours a day, and not roasting for 4 days a week. I'm doing less. Well, we're not absorbing. It means that 162 million, that 10%, is probably, we're not roasting that much in that market segment. It is not for capacity. It is for other reasons that we're roasting coffee with those smaller roasters. Certainly not for capacity, in this segment here. And certainly the working horse, and don't take this here with 12 kilo, the working horse is the 12 kilo, but it could be also 15 kilos, it could be 10 kilos. But in this market segment, it's the best, it's the model, a fair model in order to see that 10%, we're talking about that lower bottom market segment with the majority of all roasters, 10% is that market segment out of 1,620,000,000, 162 million kilograms of coffee. Now, we're talking about electric roasters. Electric roasters are in the market for over 40 years. And I know that personally because I sold them. And what were those electric roasters? They were sample roasters. That's not that the fine beauty, cuties, that you have today as tabletop units with small capacities. You're talking about sample roasters. And why did we have sample roasters? We sold a lot of these sample roasters. And they went from 100 gram to 250, 500 gram, 1 kilo. Also all the way up to 2.5 kilos. But what for? And in particular in those 100 gram, there were sample roasters. They were basically purchased by people that had to trade coffee, that had to buy coffee, by farms, by the market. Coffee is the only commodity that is tested before it is valued for the market. That's where these guys came in. The market in New York had those electrically, but also gas. And all the larger national roasters, all the green coffee people, they had those sample roasters because they wanted to test that coffee before they're going to make a contract or accepting a contract. So that's where these roasters came into play. For sure, they didn't have all those gimmicks of profile roasting and all already set up. No, they didn't have it. For testing purpose, they didn't need that. Nor could you use these roasters, and nor can you use these roasters, or is it advisable to use these roasters for developing a profile. You cannot make a profile up on these roasters and then transfer it into a larger roaster. Not going to work, Believe me, not going to work. So this is what we have today. All what came out, you got it here on. They are beauties. Nice roasters, small capacities. Everything what we learned commercially, designing large roasters with the technology, with the roasting technology involved. I mean, the profile roasting, controlling a roaster, for safety for man and machine. Everything what we learned, kind of, in today's world of electronics, can be easily, absorbed by this. This guy we have also in our office, and yes, we can roast with this. It's a sample roaster. Is it giving us anything that we can go by for saying, okay, we're going to develop like a profile? No, but it roasts the coffee based on density. So it's beauty, as much as all these are, but certainly not for capacity. And by the way, the agency, the environmental agency, can care less. They're going under the radar. They're not concerned about that. They're not concerned about CO or that it's a nuisance. Not at all. They're below that. It's because the limit is their 15-pound batch. If it is more than 15-pound batch, then the agency becomes concerned. But if it's below 15 pound, not concerned.